9 core competencies.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. A little overview
All right.
today.
Okay. Want me to just go, or you want to start with a question?
I know you just want to just go, so I think I just,
Just boom.
yeah.
All right. Well, so the big idea behind the 9 core competencies is that when you think about the art and science of building a company and obviously getting it to the place where it's a great company, and for me, the big idea is ultimately we want to build a company that we call a stage 5 company, where someone would love to either buy it from you or take it over from you, right? So you've got the business to a place where it's not dependent upon you anymore. So what does it take to get from here to there? And, based upon everything I've done over the decades, I really think there are 9 things you got to be really great at. I'm going to summarize them at first, and then I'll go and do it a little bit more for each one. But given that we try to do a half an hour, it's probably going to be pretty quick on each one. So like I've said in other podcasts, vision first, right? We got to get everybody on the same page and stoked about where we're going and who we are and why we do the things we do. And if you don't have the vision in great shape, then I believe it's much more difficult to attract and retain great people. So vision's first, right? And then, it's funny, I think part of the vision thing is now you go from the vision, if you think of it as core, why are we doing the things we do? Where are we going? You need to have a strong point of view on who your ideal customer is, right? And then you need to have a sense for, who your ideal people are to serve those customers, so the core values. And then you need to have a product or service that you're selling to that ideal customer. And then, you need to, so you got vision, and then you got customer, and then you got people, right? And then in the next one down is, you could say, well, how do we organize our people? So that's structure, right? And then, what are we going to go for, right? Because we all want to have this sense of a goals and building something bigger and stronger and better as we're moving along, have a sense of progress. And so goals are another one. And then as you're moving all through this, you got to stay connected. And so meetings is another competency. As one of the things you want to have and talk about when you're in meetings is data. How are things going versus what we thought they'd be doing? And then you have process, right? So these are all the processes that we need to do all the things we need to do. And ultimately, while I always say you don't make money because you want to make money, you make money because people value what it is you do, one of the ways to measure how you're doing things is enterprise value. So are you creating more and more value? And ultimately, the enterprise value, it's not just about, just making something, making money off the increase in the value of your shares, but it's also about resiliency, right? So you want to have a lot of value to the company, so you can borrow if you need to, so you can make acquisitions if you need to. So those are the 9 core competencies. I'll do them again: vision, customer, goals, people, structure, data, meetings, process, and e-value. And it's funny, sometimes, right, I'll sit here and I know the 9 core competencies, but I'll have a brain fart. So that's one of the reasons why I want to have it here. So vision, we've talked a lot about before, right? So the vision is as I say, it's all about, it's at the core of it, there's a why, right? So why are we doing this? Why are we building this company? How do we make life better? So we call that the purpose, passion, just cause. And so at the core of the vision is a why. And then, okay, so this is how we'd like to make life better. So who are we going to serve to make that life better? And so that's your ideal customer, right? And then in terms of the ideal customer, what is it that we're selling? What makes us unique? What makes the customer interested in doing business with us? And we call that the unique value proposition. And then, of course, now if we're going to do all this, and we're going to build this and we're going to serve these people this way, what kind of people do we want to attract and retain? What do our ideal colleagues, ideal team members look like? And so that's where the core values come in. And then, okay, you have these people and you want them to believe that your dreams are big enough to accommodate their dreams. And so that's the good old-fashioned compelling, audacious goal. And then you want to have sense that you're progressing towards that big, hairy, audacious goal, as Jim Collins would say, as we would say, compelling, audacious goal. And so now you're moving into, okay, where are we going to be in 3 years? What are the goals for 3 years? Where are we going to be in 1 year? What's the goal for 1 year? Where are we going to be in 90 days? Because obviously one of the reasons we're called 90 is we help people march the entire organization, right? Team by team, march 90 days at a time, hitting 90% of the things that matter. And so then you get down to the 90-day goals, or rocks as we call them. And the last part of what we believe is an excellent element of your vision is what we call long-term issues, which are these things that we just can't, we know we want to get to them, but we just can't deal with them in the next quarter. And so we put them on the long-term issues list. So that's vision. Customer, as I said earlier, obviously we're going to serve a customer. We're going to serve them with a unique value proposition. But what do we mean by a customer, right? So that's getting really clear on the demographics and the psychographic and the geographic. And so strengthening that, that key component, fundamentally, it's all about, when someone asks one of your customers why they do business with you, they can explain that, right? Well, I love 90 because, it's a great all-in-one platform. I love them because the customer service is amazing. I love them because the training and development materials to help us understand, sort of all the concepts and the tools and the disciplines associated with that platform are really exceptional. I love them because I can trust them. They're amazing with regard to the security they provide to all of our data, and they make it so much easier for us to really see what's working and what's not working. So ultimately you want your customers to sort of actually be able to sell you to someone else using your words. So that's customer, right? And ultimately, you'd love to have at least 90% of your customers to be ideal. Why don't you want 9 ideal customers? Because they're non-ideal, they're going to not be buying what you're selling. Maybe they're just people that aren't particularly good to be with, and they're making your customers' success people or your clients' success people miserable. So that's why I wish everybody would have a really clear picture of their ideal customer, the psychographics, the geographics, and demographics, and ultimately get to the place where 90% of their customers are ideal. So that's customer goals. As we said earlier, that's about the big, hairy, audacious goals, and the 3-year, the 1 year, and the 90-day. And it's simply about, are you setting good goals? Are you consistently hitting them? Once again, back to 90, right? 90% of the time, we're turning our rocks into done. So that's what the goal competency is all about. People, we think about it from the perspective of both the core values. So we obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, we have 6 core values here, right? So we're the G tribe, right? So the G stands for, get smart stuff done, and the T is for teamwork, and the R is for resilience, and the I is for inquisitive, and the E and the B is for better and better version of the best version of ourselves, and the E is for extra mile. And we lean into helping everybody that is interested in joining us really understand what each of those 6 core values are. And obviously I spend a hell of a lot of time talking about that right now. But ultimately, what we try to do is have at least 95% of our people be really good cultural fits. And culture is more than just the core values. Obviously, it's they buy into our mission, they buy into our agreements-based culture, right? So we believe that their agreements are everywhere. In earlier podcasts, I've said that, I see frameworks everywhere. I see agreements everywhere as well. So core values are agreements. Your roles and responsibilities are agreements. To-dos are agreements. Rocks are agreements. The targets associated with your KPIs that help us make sure that everything's going smooth, those are agreements, right? So if all of a sudden, we're having issues, we agree that performance there, because the numbers aren't being hit, whether you're inside or outside some range, whatever it is, we agree that that's an issue. We should talk about it. So agreements are everywhere, and ultimately, we want to attract people who genuinely exhibit the behaviors that our core values talk about. As I said, I could talk a lot about our core values, but I won't today. But ultimately, I'd love to have like 95% of the people be great cultural fits. Structure, that really helps us understand how we divide and conquer, right? Obviously structure is two-dimensional. An org chart, an accountability chart, as EOS would call it. There are the columns that have the centers of excellence or departments. We call them core functions a lot. And then we have a very specific methodology for layering, and the layering methodology really helps us make sure that the people sitting at that layer, we call them stratums, that they can handle the objectives associated with that layer, right? Sometimes the objectives are simply day-to-day, week-to-week. Some objectives are quarterly. Some objectives are year to 2 years. Some objectives are 2 to 5, and some objectives are 5 to 10. And so based upon the complexity of the objectives, the time span associated with the objectives, we have a whole structuring methodology, or a could say a framework, right? So that structure, data we've been saying for a long, long time that we want to help our clients turn data into a superpower. We're 7+ years in, and I think we're finally starting to do some really good stuff with data on our own side. And we've got a great head of data now, full-time, our first full-time head of data in the company. And, we're working on doing a lot of things around advancing not only our own data competency, but also giving our clients the ability to have amazing access to data. We're doing things in the engineering pods to start to expand our integrations so that data's right then and there, and it flows right into the system. And ultimately, what we want to do is help clients take the data that's everywhere, right? Just like frameworks are everywhere, agreements are everywhere, data's everywhere, and be able to give them access to data so that they have not only really good hindsight, like, okay, what the heck has been going on in this area for this period of time, but then to give them the insights associated with it, like, hey, by the way, you got these things going on, and so it's likely that that there's another issue and it could be over here. And then ultimately, not to be minority reportish, but I think with the advancement of AI and the technology and the data that we have here, someday we're going to be able to give them a little bit of foresight that they could not possibly have had without the power of the platform. So that's data. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I say it too often. But we're always in meetings, and there are various types of meetings. Actually, I think on the drawing board is a guide that I've been wanting to write for a long time on sort of like the 21 types of meetings, right? And so obviously there's weekly meetings, and there's quarterly meetings, and there's annual meetings, there are feedback meetings. Those are pretty straightforward, right? But there's also the state of the company meeting. There are also we have Tiger Team meetings, right? I'm trying to think through a bunch of different meetings, but there are a lot of different meetings that ultimately, there's monthly financial review meetings or board meetings. I could keep going, but 21, right? And ultimately, yeah, there's a bunch of different meeting types, and once again, back to frameworks that we talked about in another podcast, or we will talk about, can't remember the order of these things anymore, but good meetings have a structure, right? So they have, the good meetings start on time, they end on time, they're the same day of the week if they're a recurring meeting, and so they have an agenda, right? And there's just a structure to it. You become really good at running those meetings, and so you're not reinventing things all the time. And so we help clients think about and measure the mastery of their meeting competency. The other two competencies, to go on. Obviously, you think about the rows and the columns, right? The columns being the various areas of centers of excellence, core functions, departments, whatever people want to call them. They all, tend to work with one another. They're there for a reason. And so, if you look at our company right now, we have 11 going on 12 departments or core functions. You start with branding, all right? And then you move into marketing, and then you move into creative, which supports marketing and branding. And then we move into education, right? And in theory, you could say content, right? So we have content, we have education, and then we move into, customer service, we move into partnerships, we move into data, we move into engineering, we move into people, and then we move into finance, right? And so we have that's either 10 or 11 departments. And as you well know, right? Every single day we're crossing 3, 4, 5 departments.
Oh, yeah.
And we're crossing, like back to I said earlier, like a stage 5 company has tends to have 5 layers associated with it. I mean, we have people going from stratum 1 to me in meetings almost every day, probably, right? If you think about it, almost every day. And then so you're going up and down, you're going across, and that's a heck of a lot. And so some of that stuff is repeating, and those are processes, and some of that stuff's ad hoc, and some of that stuff is in between those two things, right? So you have tiger teams coming together and to work on a rock or some large project that's not rockish, but for all practical purposes is an ongoing project. And so specifically with regard to things that we're doing on a repeatable basis, those are the processes, right? And every single department leader now has process mastery as one of their roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities, and we measure that, right? And so we document the processes, we train everybody up on them, and then we want to make sure people follow through the processes, and then because I think we've talked about this before, right? Because we have this idea that everything in a company, most everything inside a company is entropic, right? And there's a little anti-entropy, all right, going on in there.
You try to organize it, right? Build the structures and everything to do what you can against the entropy and the inevitable chaos of things.
Yeah.
But you can only do so much.
But you can only do so much, right? And so the processes are very entropic, unfortunately. So, the business evolves, it grows, things change. And so, in terms of mastering a process, it's a never-ending thing. You can't once you get your processes reasonably well documented, you can't overinvest, you can't underinvest. And what we find is maybe every 6 to 12 months, we go in and take a look and say, hey, do these still make sense, right? And stand back and with a critical eye and say, do we need to evolve these things, or do we need to change the documentation? So processes is really the only core competency right now where I believe we're less than 90% strong. I think everything else we're either right at it or above it in terms of the 9 core competencies. But process is hard, and most people don't like it. But that's why now we make it very clear that every single department leader owns their processes and should check in on them every 6 months. And then last but not least, right, back to you don't make money because you want to make money because people value what it is you do. It's if we're doing all these things well, we should see an improvement in enterprise value, right? And enterprise value is basically what's the total value of the company. Shareholder value is the value of the company minus any outstanding debt. Enterprise value is the whole thing. So, some businesses are a multiple of EBITDA. Some businesses are not doing particularly well, and it's just basically the liquidation value. Some businesses are a multiple of revenue, especially like SaaS businesses that are growing fast and that have the ability to generate a decent amount, decent margins in terms of EBITDA at some point. We're still big time investing in 90, and so we don't have any EBITDA. So EBITDA measurement doesn't make as much sense but businesses like ours are valued on a multiple basis, and the multiples change based upon the bigger the company is. Multiple is basically just an inverse of a percentage, percent, and the percents are based upon risk. So there's risk reward. If you go invest in a T-bill, I don't even know what you can get a return on it these days. Let's just say it's 2%. Well, obviously to invest in something really risky, you need a heck of a lot more. And then as the risk goes down, the interest rate you need. But those interest rates really, if you just inverse them, they're multiples, right? And so, some businesses trade at low multiples, some businesses trade at high multiples. And then, as I said, some businesses trade at a multiple of enterprise value, a multiple of EBITDA. Some businesses trade at a multiple of EBITDA minus normalized CapEx. Some businesses trade at a multiple of revenues, and some businesses trade based upon liquidation value. So those are the 9 core competencies, and what we do is we measure ours every 3 months when the leadership team gets together, and each of us does a 9 core competencies survey. We call it an org fit survey, and it helps us make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how strong we are. We love getting to 90% strong across all 9 of them. And when that happens, what we know, having worked with tens and tens and tens of companies, is that the company is in a really good position in terms of how well it's being run, in terms of how well everybody's on the same page, in terms of how everyone's living up to their agreements, back to agreements-based cultures.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very good spark notes of 9 chapters of a thing, right, that we'll go into, a little overview. So now that we have time for a couple questions, I think in your experience, where do companies, which of the 9 is usually the weakest or the most overthought, right?
Well, those are 2 separate, very big, different questions. So as I said earlier, I think almost universally, process is the last one to get over 90%. And it's the easiest one to fluctuate above 90 and below 90. And there's a whole host of reasons for that, but I'll give a couple. So number one, as a business evolves into a company and then a stage 5 company, and as it gets more and more expert, you go from a very simple business that has like sales, marketing, and client success being one thing, and operations being one thing, and finance being one thing, right? So you just have 3 departments. And then what a lot of people will do is they'll build layers under those 3 departments that go beyond the department heads. So what I mean by that is, I want to say that differently. I believe, and this is Elliot Jack's model framework, right? That the first layer, which we call a stratum of the organization, has objectives that are anywhere from 1 day to 3 months. And the second layer has objectives from 3 months to 1 year. And the third layer is 1 year to 2 years. And that's where I believe you need department heads. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll actually create more layers than that below the department heads. But that creates almost shadow organizations, and you have people leading people where you're like, I don't know if you're really that much better than I am in terms of being able to problem solve and deal with, sort of complicated problems, as an example. It's the classic middle management, quote unquote, tagging that sort of gets some people like pejoratively talk about. It's that layer. If you have a layer, if you have more than 2 layers underneath the department heads, it's that layer that tends to get walloped if there's needs to be layoffs, which is why we really focus hard on never having that layer, because we never want to have anybody laid off, as everybody in our company knows. And so what you need to do is, instead of adding layers, you want to just get more and more experts, right? And so now all of a sudden you split sales, marketing, and customer service and now you've gone from 3 to 5. In operations, let's talk about a software company, right? We obviously have engineering, we have, and then we have product, and then we have data. All of that could be considered under operations, right? And then when you go over to marketing, right, we've split ours out now to, we've got brand and creative and traditional marketing, and we have education, and really you could even say we have content. So you could say there's 5 areas that marketing turns into. We don't have sales. We like to say we don't sell, we serve. But we do have the partnership organization that has relationships with the coaches. And so, what's happened with us is, as I've said earlier, we've gone from, the sort of the simple 3 department heads to 11. And because that 11 got to be a relatively large, what's the term I want to use, span of control for yours truly, we are now on the final stages of putting in a C-suite at the 4th layer, right? And so we have a CFO, we have a CTPO, we have a chief revenue officer, and then ultimately we're in the market for a CMO. And so I've gone from being at that level 4 position, kind of playing the integrator and the visionary, to now being fully up at the level 5, where I can focus on the 5 to 10 years out. And I've got great people coming in or already in underneath me, focusing on the 2 to 5, overseeing those 11 different departments. And you could ultimately see those departments even getting, having more, right? Because we're splitting product into sort of core product, and then there's a product team, and potentially another product team focused on some new stuff we got going on. Won't talk about that. So if you think about that, every single time you split things up, now you got to rethink through your processes. So the process stuff is, it's always changing. But you can't focus on it all the time. So once again, it's like every 3 months or 6 months. And really, it's based upon the 9 core competencies review, right? If all of a sudden everybody's like, hey, we got process problems, are now down at 80%, we'll stick in there. So that that process is the hardest one. What was the other question?
Which was the hardest, and which one's the most overlooked? Like, if people are just sort of, intentionally or not, turn a blind eye to.
So our definition of enterprise value, right? Not our definition. I would say that our approach to thinking about enterprise value, we believe that ultimately, because we're a huge believer in creating a high trust organization, a high trust agreements-based culture, right? The whole trust thing for us means a lot of transparency, right? So that's one of the factors associated with building a high trust organization. And so, we're very transparent about enterprise value. We're very transparent about how we're doing in terms of creating and growing enterprise value. Everybody in the company who's been here for at least 90 days has options, or are investors. They've literally bought shares. So we have a bunch of people who own shares in the company. And so, I think there are a lot of founders and CEOs out there who are, I don't want to say the word afraid, but they're very anxious about talking about enterprise value, right? And we're not. And I think that ultimately we believe to be a real master of enterprise value, everybody in the company needs to understand what drives the organization's value. They need to understand, how strong it is in terms of being prepared for a downturn, right? In my opinion, we owe them that. But that's just me. So I think, enterprise value is one that, as an example, EOS doesn't have that in its 6 key components, right? But mastering enterprise value, not just in terms of like, I understand, me, the CEO, I understand if we increase EBITDA by this, it's going to increase the enterprise value by that. We work really hard to make sure everybody in the company has a sense for what increases the value, because back to an agreements-based culture, if you're really clear on the things that matter and you help everybody in the company understand the things that matter, right? You're explicit with regard to them, they're all coherent and it all resonates, then they've got context that helps them make decisions. And if you know that they have that context, then you don't have to worry about things if they didn't have that context. And so I think enterprise value is probably the one that most people don't focus on at the whole company level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think especially at the whole company level.
Yeah.
It's a harder one to stay mindful of, just like throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Whereas process, everyone's interacting with those things, everyone sees the goals, a lot of people are interacting with the customer and actualizing the vision and everything. But
yeah, and the truth is, certain people are like more interested in it than other people are, and that's fine, right? But we still talk about it every single quarter.
Yeah.
Right. And during the onboarding process, we educate people on it, and then of course when we hand them the options, we educate them on the options and how to think about the options. And so, that's another never-ending journey, because, we added 70 people last year. And so that's 70 people now that we're working on helping them understand enterprise value. And like I said earlier, some are going to care more about it than others. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a good way to sum everything up.
Cool.
And, we'll talk more about the rest of them in a future episode.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right.